all of our things that we take in, I think, have the possibility of keeping us far from our divine spirit or bringing us closer to our divine spirit. And these are like especially potent ways of accessing divine spirit. But if we're just taking them and we're being like, psilocybin as a chemical acts in a way where it matches with your serotonin 2 receptors and it shuts down your default mode network, and your default mode network, it's like you're missing the point.
You're just making a completely different point. all of the spirituality out of it, and you're just co-opting it into science so that it can be a tool for capitalism.
The Always Be podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the Always Be podcast. Avery just told me to take the lead, so I get to do the intro. Oh, and by the way, that's Avery. And I'm Brenna.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. This is a podcast where we talk about transpersonal topics. We spent the first episode talking about what transpersonal means. So if you want to like that full dive, go listen to that episode. It was a good one. Essentially, it is sort of the intersection between psychology and spirituality, wisdom traditions. That is putting it very concisely, and it's not covering all the bases, as you would know if you listened to the first episode. But just for our purposes, if you don't feel like doing that, you can just take that definition and run away with it. Go for it. Run away.
Get going.
All right, Avery, what's your vibe?
Oh my God, my vibe. My vibe today is exhaustion. I'm exhausted and I'm in a like rebellious, angsty sort of teenage mood. Yeah. But
Cool.
I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to be with you. I'm just feeling really low energy. What's your vibe?
Yeah, this is interesting. I was telling Avery about this before because I'm having the opposite vibe, which is I actually had to stop about 2 sips into my cup of coffee yesterday, and I didn't even make coffee at all today because I have so much energy. Like I was shaking. So I don't know what's going on. I saw a full arch rainbow today, which I have learned is like the different rainbows. It's like if it's not a full rainbow, it's just partial rainbow. It's like letting you know that you're on the right path, but you're still gathering energy. And then when you see the full rainbow, it's like a gateway. Like go for it. Like go for the things. If you can see the full arch, that's what. Who just told me that? I'm trying to remember. Anyway, but that's what I learned about rainbows. So that was exciting. And I'm feeling, I told Avery, I had a lot of downloads about our future projects and always be collective in our whole goal. And I'm feeling really motivated to learn and to grow and to be the person and in the position to help that I want to be in. Yeah, I feel like I'm navigating myself into a place where I will have the ability to enact the change that I want to see. And I'm starting small by trying to do that in my own space, just with the people in my life and people I meet. Yeah, that's all.
Love that. I can't believe you saw 4.
You know, I see a lot of them, actually. But this was the first one that I had seen. Actually, I'm trying to remember if I saw a full rainbow yesterday, too. I definitely at least saw a partial rainbow. I saw a partial rainbow yesterday and a partial rainbow today. And then I was looking in the rearview mirror of the car, and there was just full bright rainbow. There was one going to CrossFit, and there was one coming back from CrossFit. So
Wild.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, today we are going to be talking about. We're going to try to tackle the very complex and nuanced subject of psychedelics, and while sort of Avery's yawning.
I'm so sorry.
We're
What do
gonna
I
just
do?
be. I don't know. You're allowed to show up to this podcast in whatever state you are in, as long as you still want to be here.
Yeah, I want to be here. Just tired.
Okay, then your yawns are welcome. Okay.
Okay.
We're diving into the complex topics of psychedelics, which I have a lot of interest and opinions about. And then, though I'm by no means an expert, but then we're also talking a little bit about plant medicine and, yeah, in terms of working holistically, things that we're eating. Is that a good summary of what we're going to talk about? Do we have a question?
What role do
Avery wrote down.
psychedelics play in healing?
That's a good
Modern
question.
healing or just healing? Healing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What role do psychedelics play in healing?
Yeah. The first thing we were going to start out with was just giving a little background about our personal experiences in these related realms.
Yeah. I can dive in.
Go for it. Yeah, that's what I was sort of. Yes,
So,
I invite you to dive.
yeah, most of my psychedelic experiences have been with mushrooms and MDMA and SAS. And I don't know if I consider those psychedelics, but maybe they're not. I haven't ever done LSD. Ketamine. But the first psychedelic I ever did was mushrooms. And I was in high school. I'm allergic to mushrooms, actually, which I found out. So I would get violently ill every time I did mushrooms, but like that can generally be a normal reaction to get sick because it's a little bit of toxicity that you're processing in your body. So I thought I was just normal, but I would get like violently ill every time I did mushrooms. Anyway, um, I would say the caveat to this is I'm sober now, and I think drugs, I'll say, maybe not plant medicine, although they could be the same thing, but I had a drug problem. I had a using problem. I used these um, substances in ways that were unhealthy for my being and soul because I was repressing and avoiding and holding and hurting. And so I am now sober from all mind altering substances. But when I was younger, I would say from 14 to 23, I did a lot of those substances along with drinking and smoking weed and all of that. So had a lot of what could be considered psychedelic experiences. Most of them were amazing. Some of them were really scary and bad.
Mm-hmm.
um, but what I gained from my relationship with those substances, I guess, would be like a deep wisdom of myself and my connection with source and spirit and my inherent like gifts, my intuitive gifts. Whenever I
Mm-hmm.
was using these substances, I felt really aligned with the power that I had um, of my intuition, which I think honestly everyone has, but um, that gave me a stronger relationship to that part of myself. And now I don't need those substances to access that, but it was positive. It was also negative. It was also like difficult for me because I was using these things to mask and to hide a lot of pain and trauma and repression. And so it was a mixed relationship that I had.
I really appreciate your perspective. And also, weirdly, while you were talking, I got like a really sharp headache pain on the side of my head. So I might look a little off screen, just so you know. Um, yeah, I appreciate you bringing in the misuse, like the personal misuse of substances, because that is, like, I think that there is a lot of people who want to say that psychedelics are non addictive. And I think that, like, I just want to say right now, I think that there are many. It's sort of like the way I feel about talking about psychedelics is I want to be very conscientious because it reminds me of the way that when we were trying to get cannabis legalized as a community, as a culture, as a nation or whatever, we essentially, like, it's a little problematic to the cause, and ultimately I to point out the downsides. But I also think that as people, if so, it's like I always talk about like the way that I talk about psychedelics, like with my dad, versus like the way that I talk about psychedelics, like with other people who practice. It's like with dad, it's like it's good, dad. It does this, it does, and this. It's like I really want to clarify the positives, but I think that we're here to have a bit more nuanced conversation. So I think there's plenty of people that are speaking to the pros of this work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And there are a lot of pros.
there's a
But
lot of
like you
pros.
said, like I think anything you can be addicted to anything. Even if you don't
Yeah, yeah,
physiologically get hooked on it, your system can get addicted and you can have all
yeah,
sorts of emotional withdrawals from things. So anything can be misused,
yeah,
even medicine, which we see all the
yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yes, I totally agree. And like I would say um the most misuse I've had of a substance was ketamine probably in my life. Looking back at it, I definitely was self-medicating to numb the pain of how toxic and abusive my relationship was. Anyway, but I got I was introduced to psychedelics. So I also started with mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, and they sort of blew my mind. I remember feeling like, oh, this is what I was looking for this whole time. Like I would see the way I liked smoking weed when I first got into cannabis. I was like, this is really awesome. I like this plant. I think it's cool. Like I like the way it makes me feel. It, makes me really relaxed. It helps me with my anxiety. It helps me sleep. I really love it. But then when I first ate psilocybin mushrooms, I was like, this is super Brenna because, and all I was just, my heart was so open. And this is just recreationally. So that was the first thing I got involved in, like you were talking about, just using it recreationally. But it was so clear. It was embodied intuition. That's how it felt. Like I was like so clear, so present. I just said what I wanted to say, and I was just in my power. It felt amazing. Um, and then I got into working with psychedelics in a more ceremonial space or in like the high dose psilocybin journeys. So high dose is usually bigger than 3 grams, but I was doing around like 5 or 6 for a high dose journey. That's the ones that just for people who don't know, It's like kind of the model, the Johns Hopkins model that's everyone talks about nowadays, is where people have the shades on and listen to music and you really basically leave your body. And I definitely had some unreal, I definitely felt very connected to God. It was very a spiritual practice for me for a long time. I was part of an ayahuasca ceremony in California. So this is like all I am conscientious of the the community that I was in with this work. I did do some MDMA, and then I got into, and then I MDMA, ayahuasca, ketamine. Ketamine was, yeah, I have a lot to say. So the traditional psychedelics, oh, LSD, yes, I also did some work with LSD recreationally and for purposes of like with a introspective purpose. I microdosed and um but it was always mushrooms. It was always psilocybin. And I have like I also like have a little bit of love for sinessence. It's another type of psychedelic mushroom and they're really sweet. But that's basically the summary. And for a long time, I've sat with people who have done high dose journeys as a guide. I used to think that was like the space I wanted to be in. And I haven't used any substances since I left my ex. And that was about 4 months ago. So I've been no alcohol, no weed, even no anything, which for, I know 4 months doesn't sound like it's very long, but basically I'm like no interest.
Crazy. I didn't even know that. I had no
As
idea.
soon as I left, I was like, I cannot do anything. It will be a slippery slope. Like not even a drink, not even like a cider or a hard bucha or like a joint. I'm like, and I'm like here for it. I love it. So I'm honestly like very pro sobriety for myself right now. So I want to speak in this like in this whole podcast. That is something that I'm bringing to the table, which is like I'm sitting in this position of like you're saying, I don't need this right now to access the states that I was accessing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And the veil is getting thinner and thinner. So it's like I think there's a lot more people who may be starting to be like, oh well, it's great to know that I can act like sometimes people don't know that they can access it. It's like you can't step into a realm that you don't even know about.
Which is
So
kind
that
of
is,
I remember having this conversation with my dad and my brother last Christmas maybe, and my dad has all this curiosity around it, and me and my brother were trying to explain the like collective experience you have when you are somebody who does some kind of psychedelics. There's always one kind of unity essence like experience that all people have. And my dad has never done anything. So he can't even access the
yeah,
memory of the last time he went to that place. And I have a lot of memories. So it's like I can kind of portal my way right there. But
yeah,
had I never done it ever, I'm sure I would have to have a very committed practice for my mind and my spirit that I did daily, probably for hours to get to that place.
yeah, exactly. I think you're so right. And I think that that is, yeah, I think that we should, yeah, some people just need to get punched in the face with spirit.
Good clarification. Punched in the face by spirit. I always think about it as like a backhand
Wait,
slap.
yeah, slap. I don't know. I used punched in the face the other day too. So my bad.
Maybe that's
You're
what
right.
you
It's
think.
very aggressive.
I
Just punched
mean,
in the face.
yeah, but some people do need to get punched in the face.
Yeah. And I think that there is something like the psychedelic experience. It really is it all of the structures in your brain that keep you from thinking about things that you don't want to think about, or from those just all dissolve. So you really are, sometimes you can really get overwhelmed by your psyche. But as us, as people who know about healing and growth and expansion, you have to look in order to face what is there.
Mm-hmm.
And the fear of looking at it is actually way harder to overcome than the thing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is why, that's what essentially I consider like a bad trip. People say a bad trip, but it's really just the inability to shut out in the way that they had cognitively things that they didn't want to look at. And so it's coming towards them, or they're looking at it and they don't want to look at it. So they're having this experience of wanting to turn the trip off. Like, I don't want to be in this. And that's why as a guide, you're just taught to help people breathe through it and actually walk through the fire and look at the things and yeah, experience and embody it and allow it to happen, because ultimately that's like what our systems are trying to do all the time. It's to shove
Mm-hmm.
this stuff in our face so that we look at it.
Mm-hmm.
We're 20 minutes in.
Okay, so let me
It's
ask
just
you
so
this.
much.
What role do psychedelics play in modern day healing? And what are some concerns that may also
Yeah.
be present in that?
Yeah. I think that, so the classic psychedelics are psilocybin, which comes from different kinds of mushrooms, mostly, I think pretty much exclusively. Um, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is found in the plants that make ayahuasca. See, I don't know everything, and some cactus are in DMT is in some like the toad. There's things. DMT, mescaline, which is the active component in peyote. Jesus, someone's going to be like, Brenna, you are so all off with this. But this is what I know. And LSD. Those are kind of the classic psychedelics. Then there's MDMA and ketamine, which are sort of lumped under this umbrella, but they're not necessarily working in the same way. So I think all of these, so when we're talking about this, we'll all just lump them all together. They're all tools that are useful. And I think breaking the rigid walls of the ego. So if there is, I think it's really, really good for folks who have like stuck thought patterns, and they're just in their repetitive patterns, and they sort of just need to be cracked a little bit, like the way you like roll an egg before you start to peel, like just jostled a little bit, and to shut down those walls, especially when you're sort of stuck in something. And I think that a lot of what counseling does is the way that a lot of talk therapy works, which is why I don't think either of us are that into talk therapy, psychoanalytic, cognitive behavioral stuff, is because it's just talking a lot about, it's all in the brain. It's just like talking through things, and you can end up in like awareness hell. That's what I call it, where you know what's wrong with you, wrong with you. Let's like put that in air quotes, but you don't, nothing's changing. You're like, I just know that this is how my brain works. And I'm like, great. Okay. That's step one. How do we shift? So I think the medicines are really good. That being said, there is a lot of dynamics in this whole Western colonization of psychedelic medicines that is happening right now that is really problematic, I think. Um, So what I was telling Avery about is how there's this, basically it's really big right now, and there's a lot of push towards legalization and decriminalization. So a lot of people are hearing about Oregon, Colorado, and California. And then there is some decriminalization happening in like individual cities. But Oregon passed the full legalization of at least psychedelics, but all substances, right? Do you know?
No idea.
Yeah. I think that there's like, so this all overlap, it just overlaps so much too with um so decriminalization I think is really, really important because that's where it overlaps with this whole prison industrial complex, where the criminalization of substances like they did with cannabis, like they've done with a lot of things, is really just not the model for managing like substances being sold illegally and or substance abuse and or like anything related to that. There, as we're seeing, there's plenty of nonviolent drug offenses that are just filling up prisons. So anyone who knows about the prison industrial thing would probably agree that decriminalizing substances is a good move. It means that, and it also means that the people who are practitioners of this medicine, so the thing that's like really, really important to acknowledge is how the plant medicines, not MDMA and ketamine, those were invented in laboratories, but are indigenous in nature, and they are not the totality of the practices around ceremonial use of plant medicine. There are whole lineages in Central and South America and in North America that are related to ceremonial use of these plants, but they also have an entire cultural knowledge of plant usage for healing. So we're looking at ayahuasca, for example, but the Shipibo people have an entire lineage of plant medicine knowledge, of which ayahuasca and the ceremony is part of it, but it's not as if it's the whole thing. So decriminalization, for example, in this country is a protection also for those people. It would mean that the work that they're doing, a lot of it's already covered by religious protection. Um, the Native American Church is one that has protections for plant medicine ceremonies, but anyone who is an indigenous individual who is practicing decriminalization means obviously that work isn't considered a crime because a lot of these substances are still illegal. I feel like I just went into so many things, Avery. So will you help me track?
Here, yeah. So here are some of my thoughts with that.
Yeah.
It's always a double-edged sword. So people who inherently are not protected by the system are fighting way harder for their safety. So if we use this example of indigenous communities that practice plant medicine and have the historical relationship with it, like the longest relationship, and it's part of their value system, and it's something that they train and they teach through like the generations, that it would be wonderful for it to be decriminalized so that they have an element of protection in the justice legal system. However, the, the opposite side of that is also it's decriminalized for everyone else who is appropriating the use of this medicine and using it sort of over recreationally as a drug as opposed to a medicine. When you take away the ceremony and the ritual and the years and generations of knowledge around what this, even just the holding container of, like you mentioned, somebody being a guide. When you take all of that away, it just becomes this sort of unconfined, messy experience. Maybe that's not bad. Maybe it's part of liberating the minds of humanity, and the more access everyone gets to it, the more healing they get. But we have to take into consideration colonization and what we saw with um, weed, marijuana, is going to be the same thing that we're seeing with, I feel like psilocybin is going to be,
Psilocybin is the one.
it's the
Yeah.
next big one. It's the next big
Yeah.
one.
Well,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, for those who don't know about what happened with cannabis in America, once it was legalized, like for example, in California, this is what has happened for individuals who are farmers, who were cannabis farmers. They like, the cannabis industry is now very much taken up by big corporate people who have a lot, like there's a lot of people who came in with money to make farms, and anybody who was growing it in a way that was spiritual and holistic, like this is also a medicine. This is the thing, is like the things that we are growing, and just in food in general, the things that we are growing are not divorced from our intention and our attitude and our feeling for them. Like I've raised a cannabis plant and it is one of the most beautiful plants ever. I think they are so cool. I think they're awesome. They're shiny and it's like glittery and sparkles and it's very cool. And there's a lot of love that you get when you grow something and then you take it in and it just feels different. There's like a whole corporate push out of anybody who's doing, all these people who had their whole livelihoods, these individual passionate cannabis farmers now have no way to compete with big money and corporate things. And so there's this big whole industry around cannabis. And so the people who were doing it early on and often illegally, not for a, and for the joy of having this medicine that's so healing in so many ways for so many people, they are no longer able to do that work that they care a lot about. And there is just a lot of corporate money. Like there's a lot of money starting to be put towards psilocybin.
Yeah. And there's always, like, I'm really glad that you mentioned the prison industrial complex, because your race and your socioeconomic status and your social location are all going to play into your level of safety in relationship to these medicines. So, like, if you were a farmer and you had a big grow operation and this was your livelihood and all of that, like, you still may have been safer as a human than somebody who lived in a city who got caught with a dime bag, even though both are illegal. But depending
Yeah.
on your identity, one person could be safer and another person could be sent to prison for the rest of their life, which is
Yeah.
a big part still of the fact that we've decriminalized marijuana, and there's still a lot of people who are incarcerated for life for nonviolent drug offenses. and they're predominantly
Yeah.
Black and brown men. That just like needs to be said. It's
Yeah.
predominantly Black and brown men and women, but mostly men.
Yeah. And that just has a huge, huge impact on the entire BIPOC community.
Right? Which historically have been the holders of this medicine.
Yeah. What I was feeling today when I was thinking about psychedelics is I was realizing like it's just so much the pattern with colonization is that you first demonize, and then once like people start to the awareness starts to come that the thing that was demonized isn't actually bad, then the system tries to take it and make it something that fits within that system. And I was feeling that with psychedelics like in the 70s when it first was became illegal, like the original trials were all legal because these substances weren't even they weren't regulated yet. So there was this whole psychedelic movement, and then it came down hard. The war on drugs came down hard, essentially. And there's a lot more to that than so. I think there's a lot of people who grew up in that sort of Reagan era, Nixon, where it was where the idea was like the substances were bad, and it's pretty obvious to those of us now that that's not the truth. And also, that was like such a thinly veiled attempt to try to continue this marginalization of individuals. And just there's plenty of other sources that speak about this all way more. But what's happening now is that the psychedelic, these medicines, people still kept working with them undercover for the belief that they really did something for people. And now I'm just watching just the narrative start to change too. The thing that bothers me also is they're like microdosing for stress reduction. It just drives me freaking nuts. I'm like, it's not for stress reduction. You stupid people. Like the system is like, how do we use psychedelics to make people more efficient laborers? Like, how do we get them to? And this is why I personally am having like a big anti-ketamine thing. It's I cannot divorce it from my own personal misuse experience. It was it's so that I just have to name that. That being said, I think ketamine is like a fake psychedelic that is going to be controversial. I think it's like a fake psychedelic that they're giving to people in order to give them the experience that they're like craving without actually forcing them out of something. Because what I'm feeling is when you take the substance out of the ceremony, it no longer has its magic. They're not independent of each other. And this is what the definition of colonization is. Colonization is not just taking something and using it for your own gain. It's taking it and robbing from it what made it effective and sacred. This is the deal. The things that heal us are the things that connect us back to God. And that is what psychedelics do, because that's what they are. That's what this medicine is. It's a powerful plant medicine. All of our things that we take in, I think, have the possibility of keeping us far from our divine spirit or bringing us closer to our divine spirit. And these are like especially potent ways of accessing divine spirit. But if we're just taking them and we're being like, psilocybin as a chemical acts in a way where it matches with your serotonin 2 receptors and it shuts down your default mode network, and your default mode network, it's like you're missing the point.
You're just making a completely different point. All of the spirituality out of it, and you're just co-opting it into science so that it can be a tool for capitalism. It's the same thing with meditation. It's the same thing with yoga. Like all of these things have been stripped out of their community and the way that you practice these things in community, and have been capitalized into this like I don't know how to like it's like buy one get one free. Buy one get one free. You know, yoga and meditation. And like, again, I've had these conversations where it's like, even if, like, if the majority of people in the world are now meditating in a way that's like at least somewhat helpful for them, is that better? Or is it all just that? Is it all just a tool to get the sheep to be complicit?
Ah!
Yoga. I have the Calm app. I meditate. I don't fucking know.
Well, I definitely like, we could talk about this later. Maybe we have a whole mindfulness episode. But one of my favorite things that I read about mindfulness was like using mindfulness for stress reduction is like using rocket fuel to power a Vespa. Like it might work, like it might move a thing forward, but it's so that's not what it's for.
Right.
Mindfulness is for enlightenment. And I think that that's enlightenment is literally also synonymous with liberation.
Mm.
These practices show where things are broken, show where you want to get out of things, but they also inspire liberation on a collective global front.
And it's
So,
again, it's putting, like we talked about in the last episode, it's putting the emphasis back on the individual. It's putting all of the burden
yeah.
on the individual to be, there's something wrong with you as a person. You're too stressed. You're not connected enough. You're whatever. And so we're going to co-opt these medicines and this magic and give it to you in a way to make you a better cog in the machine as because you're not functioning well enough for us.
This is a theory that I have about psychedelics that no one else has ever said to me. I haven't heard it, but the theory is that part of the act of doing psychedelics, part of this is something that I heard so much in my space was people having this realization where they're like, this is illegal. Why?
Mhm.
Why is this illegal? Because this is magic.
Mhm.
And in that experience, you started to have this cognitive understanding that the system that is saying it's supposed to protect you, that you're adhering to, isn't trying to protect you. Like, it's not right. It's
Mhm.
not true. We grow up with this idea that something that is illegal for a reason because it's bad. And then when we would engage in this work and with using these medicines or these substances, and you're like, alcohol is legal, but this isn't. To me, honestly, that was super liberating and healing, I think, the understanding. But now that the system's just going to take in psychedelics as well, you're losing that whole aspect of being part of sort of like a counterculture, this countercultural radical space. And it's not, you're not having to risk anything by using this medicine anymore. You're not having to say, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to try it for myself. There's something so empowering in saying, I hear that that is something you're saying is wrong, but I'm going to see for myself and I'm going to trust how I felt instead of trusting your authority on it. And
Mhm.
that is such a freaking powerful state. And that is something that's getting taken away too as we're
Mhm.
getting closer to, as it's getting more culturally accepted.
Right, and regulated.
And regulated. This is the deal. So, if I can say anything to anyone listening to this episode, I would strongly encourage you to, like, if you're listening and you're like, what do I do about this movement? I would strongly encourage you to get involved in decriminalizing, but to really be conscious about legalization, because this is like essentially the idea with legalization is it's like, if you legalization means that it has to fall under some kind of framework. They could make it recreationally legal, which is like that just means anyone can have it in any capacity. And that just opens up for a lot of use anyway. But what they're doing is they're making it medically legal, which means that you can use it if it is administered by a practitioner who is usually a psychiatrist, um, and or a doctor. And essentially, it means it's like, for example, like if an indigenous individual in Oregon wanted to, who's been practicing this as part of their lineage, wanted to legally administer the medicine, they would have to get trained by a white guy in some class. Like, I don't, there's not really a white guy, like, a metaphorical white guy, because that person has the medical license. We're back in this medical system like we were talking about last week, where the authority goes to those people who have checked the boxes according to the system. To me, that dynamic is enough to make me say no to legalization. I think it's so silly. And also, like, it just means that this medicine is all falling under the umbrella of, like we were saying, this DSM, the medical model, the mental health system. So there's a lot more to say. Yeah, but that's where I'm at in my life now, is I won't support any legalization unless, sometimes there's a complex one. Like in Maine, they were legalizing psilocybin on a state level with decriminalization also in there. So it meant that there was going to be a legal medical model, but there was going to be decrim protection for everyone else. That model I have a lot more openness to, but not all legalization motions that are up for states or cities right now are including decriminalization. A lot of them are just putting it under this psychedelic model. And then ketamine is legal in everywhere right now. It was never criminalized, I don't think, but it can only be administered medically. And it's a bunch of money. That's another huge thing, is that all of these processes are so, so, so expensive. So it's just really keeping it out of the reach, really making it inaccessible in a lot of ways too.
Right. It's weaponizing medicine. Okay, but I have something to say, and it's a little bit of a veer from psychedelics, but it's like the way that you just described the process of legalization of something and what it does to the communities that it belongs to. That's how I feel with our degree. I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do with myself because Brenna and I have received this degree from an institution, a private institution that cost a lot of money to go to. I think it's a cool institution and I fuck with it. But we have a degree in mindfulness based transpersonal psychology. So that's basically like Zen Buddhism mixed with indigenous spirituality, mixed with Western psychology. Maybe that's a quick way to summarize it. This education has taken information from indigenous communities, whether it's in East Asia, whether it's in the North Americas, wherever it is, and they've decided how to appropriate it to be curriculum for a university, which basically means even just transpersonal psychology was founded by like 4 white people at a park in San Francisco. And it's like, because they had the power to enact that as a new modality, they did. So it's like there's colonization so deep in everything that we have learned. And I don't know where that places me individually because I also represent colonization. I'm a white woman from a wealthy family who could afford this school. And I chose this degree because it felt like it was what I was meant to No, but now I'm like, how do I enact having this degree without continuing to propel colonization? Because if I want to go into the world and work with what I know, teach, counsel, advocate, I'm already in a hierarchical position over indigenous BIPOC community who I have taken this information from, and I am certified and I am validated, and they are not, because, or maybe they are, but if they don't have this degree, I'm technically in this society seen as more of an expert. And I've struggled with this the whole
Yeah.
time we were in our program. I was really struggling. I did not understand. And nobody really gave me a clear answer, to be honest. Everybody just gave me another
Yeah.
question. I will say is the biggest fucking problem with Naropa is it's so contemplative. It's Naropa University where we went. So fucking annoying. It's so contemplative. Nobody gives you an answer ever. They just give you another question. And it's super fucking annoying. Super, super fucking annoying. If anybody is listening to this podcast who is an admin at Naropa, fix that. You can't just always fucking meditate on another question. Sometimes you have to have an answer.
I definitely like I like want to scream listening to you talk about that right now. And I appreciate you naming it. And it's incredibly, yeah, it's very potent. It's bitter. It's a bitter pill. I I appreciate that Naropa is what it is, and it is not without flaws.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard because yeah, I definitely think part of the reason I went there was I was like, it's the it was like it's the farthest it was like I still want to get a master's degree from an accredited university. I want to be like I wasn't brave enough to totally dismantle that desire when I went to get this degree
Mm-hmm.
because and Naropa is one of as an accredited master's counseling degree that isn't just following the medical model and there's not that many of those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and that's a testament to my own internalization of this whole education model and this whole hierarchy that exists. I have a lot of education privilege in my family. Both of my my maternal grandparents were college professors. And so that's just this big, yeah. So there's just I just have this a lot of privilege in terms of education.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, yeah, you know. And what is the answer? There is no way like we can't snap our fingers and take away our own privilege and our and and the ways in which I guess I can speak for myself. I am still a colonizer in a lot of ways. It
Mm-hmm.
feels. I haven't figured out all the answers. I
Yeah.
think it's important to just keep working to address my own blind spots and my own assumptions and the things that I get to ignore or the things that the entitlement that I feel subconsciously.
Mm. Yeah. I think like this is obviously veered away from psychedelics, but because it's a transpersonal podcast, everything is connected to everything.
Everything's
Um,
connected to everything.
I will say that like even though I'm struggling with my positionality with this certification, it is very clear. It's the same kind of clarity that we both had around I'm not going to get licensed because that is not the right thing for me, period.
Yeah.
It's very clear too that it's like you are here because you're meant to be here. And so working with your privilege and white supremacy and capitalism is going to be a part of your work wherever you go, but don't leave this space because you're meant to be in this space. Like when I found the program at Naropa and I read the description, I think almost everybody had this really similar experience of that is it. That is it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the program I'm supposed to
Yeah.
be in. And it's
Yeah.
unique. Maybe a lot of people have that experience with their master's program, but like you said, it's not the medical model. It's different. So I think it's clear that you and I are meant to be doing something and using our positionality of privilege to be giving back to community, to be working with this collective healing that we so desire to be a part of. It's like, I don't think we're meant to leave this space. I just think we are meant to examine how much of it we take up or where we are on the totem pole of hierarchy and how we are giving back. Like, okay, I will say this, the
Yeah.
panel that I went to the other day, the thing that stuck with me the most was your privilege is equal to the amount of effort you must exert in, let's say, liberation or social justice or
Mm.
decolonizing. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have a highly privileged identity, that means we require more exertion of your effort in this matter. If you have a less privileged identity, you get to give less. And that's not how it's existing right now. It's the opposite. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
this process of
Yeah.
like reciprocity, really.
I love that word, reciprocity.
Hey everyone, we have decided to make this episode a two-part episode. So we're going to end this episode here, and next week's episode will be the continuation of this conversation, and we'll go a little bit into the colonization of psychedelics and expand the rest of that conversation. So go listen to part 2 if you are interested in more.
The vision of Always Be Collective is of an inclusive, innovative, and intuitive healing practice that uses wisdom from the mind, body, heart, and spirit. We strive to establish a community of mental health practitioners who share a common goal to expand beyond the limitations of the current mental health care system. We provide services aimed towards individual and collective healing. You can visit us at alwaysbecollective.com.